Welcome to the 35th episode of the Daft Previews podcast. In this episode, I'll be barbecuing alone as my co-host Luke has the spicy cough and he won't be able to join me this evening. So, all by myself, my goal is to preview each match. We'll be giving you our best bets, but anything can really happen when I'm left on my own. So, I'll do my absolute best to get through all these bets without going off topic too much. Firstly, quick recap on last week. I think we're only 4 from 8. There was some absolute upsets last week. I don't know many people who picked the Roosters to flop and the Storm not to cover. That was pretty unpredictable if you ask me. Broncos got the upset on the Rabbitohs. Neither of us tipped that. I definitely wish I did, but what can you do? We get another crack at it this week. So, being just me, this should be a quicker podcast, but knowing me and the level of dribble I'm capable of, this could be the longest one ever. So, buckle up. I hope you enjoy it. We're about to get this bread. So, kicking things off on Thursday. Thursday evening, we've got the Melbourne Storm versus South Sydney Rabbitohs. They're playing at AAMI Park in Melbourne. Melbourne rightful favourites at $1.39. South Sydney Rabbitohs at $3. The line on this one is 7.5. If you're looking at total match points, it's 42.5. Quite a few changes. So for the Storm, we saw Brandon Smith break his hand last week. He's out for 5 weeks. Christian Welch fucked up his Achilles, so he's probably out for the season. And so is George Jennings after screwing up his knee. Good news for the Storm. Cam Munster and Harry Grant, they come back into the side after serving some suspensions. Dean Aramea replaces Jennings on the wing. Whilst Jesse Bromwich is back. He had COVID last week, was in quarantine, so he's back, which means Nick Meaney will be shifting to the reserve. So despite all these injuries, Melbourne's still fielding a very strong team. For the Rabbitohs, not too many changes for them. Latrell Mitchell comes back in fullback. His first game since round 24 last season, since he broke Joey Manu's face. Alex Johnson will move back to his wing. And Josh Mansell moves back to the reserves. Otherwise, pretty much same shit team that got romped by the Broncos last week. So the way that we're leaning on this, firstly for myself, I'm looking at the Storm to cover. The reason why the Storm have covered the line against the Rabbitohs in 5 straight games. 5. Which is pretty loose. That's pretty wild. So despite the injuries last week, they still have a lot of key players coming back in, and I expect them to be even better. The Rabbitohs do have Latrell back, but if you watch that game, missing Reynolds, it's made a noticeable difference to their attack. It's clunky. Cody Walker looks frustrated. Their kicking game's not great, and I can't see Melbourne playing poor for 2 weeks consecutively. So might be getting the spicy cough myself. But one key stat is that Melbourne did lap these blokes 50-0 when they last met. So for myself, I'm on Storm to cover 7.5, and so is Luke. He's taken them at 7.5 on Bluebet. The very next game, which kicks off on Friday, Filthy Friday at 6 p.m. It's the St. George Illawarra Dragons versus the Penrith Panthers. They're playing at Strata Jubilee Stadium. So at 6 o'clock, we've got the Panthers, rightfully so, favourites at $1.28. The Dragons at $3.75. The line is 11.5. That's a nice looking line. And the total match points in this one is 43.5 points. So for the Panthers, they still don't have Cleary. Moses Leota, he's out for at least 8 weeks. Matt Eisenhuth returns to the 17. But outside of that, very much the same Panthers team that you would have seen last week. For the Dragons, Sharon Woods is out with a sore hamstring. Francis Molo, who played State of Origin last year, comes off the bench. And he'll be starting for the Dragons. Tariq Sims is healthy. There's no reason for him not to be playing, apart from the fact that the coach would prefer to stick with Jaden Sewer and Jack Bird in the second row. So both these teams won last week. One of the teams' win streak is going to come to an end. Firstly, for the Mad Dog Luke, he's looking at this game to go unders. Under 43.5 he could find at the tab. So under 43.5. I assume it would be the Panthers dominant defensive effort that you would have seen last week against Manly. Still without clear question mark is whether they can put the points on. So Luke's looking at the Panthers to lock the Dragons up. I'm personally leaning towards not leaning, I'm fucking picking it. Penrith Panthers minus 5.5 in the second half. So the Panthers, they've been very dominant in the second half when these teams have met. They've easily covered this line in the second half in their last 4 matchups against the Dragons. Last week, Penrith played at an amazing pace and intensity. They really put the clamps on the Eagles. I do expect the Dragons to be somewhat competitive and try to match them, but the reality is you can't go toe-to-toe with the Panthers if they're playing with that much intensity. I expect them to really pull away in the second half. I don't see the Dragons scoring at all in the second half, but we shall see. But I'm taking the Panthers minus 5.5 in the second half, whereas Luke is taking the unders 43.5 at the tab. Jumping into the main event on Friday. So at 8:05 you kick off. It's probably the most difficult match of the round to tip. 2 premiership contenders, 2 teams who were absolutely shithouse last week. We've got the Sydney Roosters versus the Manly Seagulls at the SCG, Sydney Cricket Ground. The Roosters are slight favourites at $1.80, Manly at $2. The line is 1.5 total match points. You're looking at 42.5 points. Looking at the team list, Victor Radley and Billy Smith. They both had concussions last week, but they've been named to play, so we'll see if they make it. For the Eagles, we've got Dylan Walker returning to the squad. Carl Lawton, he suffered a head knock nice and early last week, so question marks on whether he'll be playing. But relatively strong teams. Teddy versus Turbo. You got Tupou versus Saab. Manu and Harper. Very evenly matched on paper, but knowing that both teams really shit the bed last week, the question is, which way do you go? You know, who wins this game? The Roosters are at home, but they were probably worse. Manly, you could argue that they did versus Penrith, who always seems to pump them anyway. So they've been able to bounce back from that in the past, whereas the Roosters lost to the Knights, which is an absolute shock to me. They got absolutely punished. But over to Luke's bet first. So he's looking at the total points in this one. He's going the under 41.5 points at the tab for Roosters v Manly. For me, I'm going something a little bit different. So this is I think it's a sports bet exclusive bet, this one. For this game, I'm going with either team to win by 13 plus. And that pays $2.05. The reason why, both teams were shit to open up the season. You could argue that Manly's always struggled against Penrith, and you could also argue that the Roosters had 8 players playing their first time in a long time. Their combinations were absolutely cooked. The last 2 games that these 2 teams have played against each other, they've been split. So each team has won 1, and each team has won by a lot. So Manly won by 36 points the last time out, whilst the Roosters won by 42 points the game prior. So it seems like whoever is on, and they just can't be stopped. If you watch last week's games, you'd see that defensively they're not absolutely great. And they're both a little bit rusty to start the season. If one team does come into this game more motivated than the other and does turn it off, I think there's a good chance that there's a blowout on the card. So I don't know who's going to win the game. I'm putting my money on someone to win by more than 13 plus. So whoever's ahead, that's who I'm going to be backing. So that's quite an interesting market. Haven't really bet on them too much before, but in games like this, I'm not too sure on what's going to happen to the total points. Couldn't tell you who's going to win, but I'm hoping whoever does win wins by a very large margin. Into our slutty Saturday, my favourite day of the week. Kicking things off at 3 o'clock, we've got the Gold Coast Titans versus the New Zealand Warriors. That's at Cbus Super Stadium, so home game for the Titans. Looking at the lineups, we see the return of Reece Walsh from his sugar booger suspension. So he slots in straight to fullback. Matt Lodge is back from suspension as well. Chanel Harris-Tavita moves to 5'8". Cody Nikarima drops out. I do believe that Sean Johnson is also injured as well. So interested to see how the halves look for the Warriors. Most likely they have a very similar half setup as last year, or there's a chance that Ash Taylor is going to be playing at 7, making his debut for the club. But relatively strong Warrior side despite all the changes. But looking at the Titans, AJ Brimson is good to go. So he's back. He was named to play last week, pulled out late. So he'll be slotting in at 5'8". Then Will Smith will slide out to the bench. The Gold Coast Titans are the favourites at $1.37. The Warriors at $3.10. The line on this one is 8.5. The total match points are at 47.5. Looking at the Mad Dog, what's Luke got? Luke's got over 47.5 points at the tab. I do like that bet. Reason being, if you watch the Gold Coast versus Parramatta Eels game last week, you just see how easy it is for them to leak points. That first half was absolutely crazy. And looking at the Warriors, defensively not the best either. If the weather's good Saturday afternoon up in the Gold Coast, it's going to be a nice dry track. There should be a lot of points on offer. But for me, my play is for the Gold Coast Titans to go over on their points, which is 27.5. The reason being, the Titans pumped the Warriors 44-0 to close out the season last year. They also scored 28 points against Parramatta, who was a much better defensive team than the Warriors. Plus, the Warriors also gave up 28 points against the Dragons last week, who don't have the same attacking flair as the Titans. So, I'm really hot on that bet. That's one of my favourite ones for the round. Keep that one in mind if you're looking to build some multis. Man, this spicy cop's really getting to me. This is quite difficult smashing through this stuff on my own, but hopefully you guys are sticking with me. I'm still rolling. The second game for your slutty Saturday is the Cronulla Sharks versus the Parramatta Eels. 5:30 p.m. at PointsBet Stadium. The Parramatta Eels are the favourites at $1.65. The Sharks are at $2.25. The line on this one is 3.5. And the total match points are over 42.5. Firstly, with the Sharks, they've named the exact same team that played last week. A bit underwhelming considering all the hype, but at the same time, I think we understand it's going to take them a couple of weeks till they really click and find some form. For the Parramatta Eels, Sean Russell, he scored a hat-trick last week, but he's clearly not going to play after copping some knees in the ribs, which moves Wonga Blake out to the wing, and Tom Opacek comes into the side at centre. I think it's going to be a very close game according to the bookies, but I really think Parramatta has potential to blow these guys out. The Sharks did versus Canberra, lost to them. Canberra, not a great side, missing a 7. You've heard it all before, but that game was a lot closer than it really should have been. Parramatta, they really should have beat the Warriors by a lot more, but some strange things were happening last week. Maybe some opening round jitters, I'm not sure, but Parramatta are normally a team that likes to peak early. The Mad Dog, he's, again, looking at total points, looking at under 43.5 at the tab. So he's looking for some defensive steal by the looks of things. Whereas on Sportsbet, the line is 42.5. So if you're looking at total points, it looks like tab is the way to go. They've got a little bit more wiggle room. If you want to play it safer and you want to multi these things up. For me, though, I'm going to be taking Parramatta minus 3.5. The reason being they beat the Sharks in their last 2 games. In the most recent matchup, they pumped them, beat them convincingly 28-4. The teams aren't too different to who lined up last week. I believe Cronulla will take some time before their spine really starts to click together. Whereas Parramatta has been working with the same spine for years, and they do have a tendency to peak early. So all eyes on Parramatta to cover that line, that 3.5. Pretty confident on that one. Woo! All right, 3 more games. Let's go. Let's do this. Saturday evening. We've got the Canberra Raiders versus the North Queensland Cowboys at 7:35. Queensland Country Bank Stadium. Canberra Raiders are the favourites at $1.54. The Cowboys at $2.50. The line on this one is 4.5 points. The total match points are 43.5 if you're looking at your totals. Looking at the lineups, we can see the Cowboys do have Jordan McLean. Cohen Hess has moved into starting at prop. Whereas good news for the Cowboys, Jason Taumalolo, he's back playing lock after failing in the experiment at prop and playing less minutes. That wasn't great for them last week. Whereas for the Raiders, a massive in for them is Matt Frawley. He's back at halfback after Brad Schneider got forced into COVID isolation. Josh Hodgson, we all saw he got injured last week, fucked his knee up, might miss a month. But Tom Starling takes over at hooker, who actually improved the Canberra Raiders attack when he was on. So despite the injuries, I think the replacements for the Raiders are looking pretty good. The Mad Dog for this one, he's looking at the Raiders to cover this 3.5 points at Bluebet. For me, I think this is going to be a very close game. So my selection is for either team to win 1-12. So this one is specific to Sportsbetter, but I think you can find this market with other bookies. But either team to win 1-12. The reason being the last 2 games between the Raiders and Cowboys, they've been settled by 2 points each. With both teams taking a win each. I don't really rate either team very highly, and I imagine this game will be close. Canberra do deserve to be favourites after claiming a win last week, but with the Cowboys playing at home, JT moving into lock, which is his preferred position, I think the Cowboys are still a chance. They weren't terrible last week. They just played as bad as their opposition, and if they do play as well or as bad as their competition, this game should be very close. So either team 1-12 for me. Into your CD Sunday, kicking it off at 4 o'clock. It's the Newcastle Knights versus the West Tigers at McDonald Jones Stadium. The Newcastle Knights are the favourites at $1.45. The Tigers at $2.75. The line on this one is 7.5 points. If you're looking at totals, we're looking at 44.5 points. The Mad Dog Luke, he is looking at the Tigers plus 7.5. So finally, we see an underdog. For me, I'm also taking the Tigers plus 7.5. So the reason why, both the Knights and the Tigers, they both played better than most predicted. The Knights ambushed the Roosters and they beat them on effort. The Tigers were out to an early lead over Melbourne before the Storm actually gave a shit. I do like the Tigers in this one, who have won their last 2 matches against the Knights. I do like the addition of Peachy off the bench, and Hastings seemed to get better the longer that he was out there on the field. The Knights had too many players play out of their skin last week, so you would have seen Dane Gagai thought this was State of Origin. He played so good. Dominic Young, who's normally, honestly, a very average player who makes a lot of errors, makes a lot of poor decisions. He played the game of his life as well. And I just think it's highly unlikely that they play at that level week in, week out. So I am expecting some regression from some of the Knights players after such a wonderful week last week. And I do like that 7.5. If that was 5.5, I probably wouldn't take it because, I could see the Knights winning by 6, but 7.5, I see that as value, and clearly Luke does as well. So we're both taking the 7.5. And into the most important game of the round. Well, not really. Put it this way. If your team is ever scheduled to play at 6 p.m. on a Sunday, no one gives a shit about them. And unfortunately for me, that game is the Canterbury Bulldogs versus my Brisbane Broncos. So at 6:15, it's at a core stadium in Sydney. The Broncos are now $1.71 favourites. If you looked at this on Sunday, they were at $1.90, so I snapped them up then. Canterbury Bulldogs are out to $2.15. The line on this one is 2.5. Total points at 42.5. Looking at the lineups, biggest news for the Broncos is Adam Reynolds is finally making his club debut after missing it with COVID last week. That means Albert Kelly shifts from halfback to 5'8". Billy Walters goes to the interchange. Tyrone Roberts is out of the squad. We also see Tessie New come back from his hamstring injury, and he takes over fullback from Jermaine Asako. For the Bulldogs, Tavita Pangai Jr. set to make his Bulldogs debut. He missed round 1. He is a former Bronco. Bloke's going to be itching. He's absolutely mad. So really looking forward to see what crazy shit he gets up to. Quite a few players for the Bulldogs did suffer some concussions last week, so questionable as to whether they're going to play this week. But Very interesting game. Both teams have recruited well in key positions over the off season. We saw last week that the Bulldogs really struggled to score points, but so did the Broncos. So these two teams had the lowest scoring games of the round. So we'll start off with the Mad Dog. He's made the right decision here. He's back in the Bronx to cover the line. On Sportsbet, the line is 2.5 at the moment, but on Bluebet, which he's decided to go with, you can get them at 1.5, which is a very good line to take, just in case it's just a 2-point game. For me, I'm going a little bit harder than I normally would, but I'm backing the Broncos to cover the 2.5. I'm also backing the total points for the game to go under 42.5. So Brisbane, welcome back. Tessie, Reynolds, we also got Hetherington, and that's adding them to the team that beat the Rabbitohs last week. The most impressive part for the Broncos last week was their defense. They only allowed 1 try from the Rabbitohs team. The Dogs, on the other hand, they struggled. They didn't score a point to 60, 70 minutes into their game against the Cowboys. I think there's just too many new pieces in that Dogs team for me to back. I think it's like Cronulla. It's going to take them a very long time before they click. What even makes it worse is probably the coaching. The Bulldogs struggled immensely to put points on the board last year. Their structures don't look great, and I think there is a personnel issue, but it's also a coaching issue. The coach hasn't changed. He hasn't been replaced. Gus Gould's not working on their attack, that's for sure. And I do see this game going unders. 42.5 is way too high for my liking, so take the Broncos to cover the line. Take the unders on the total points. Roast me if I'm wrong. I'll fucking wear it. Let's go. But outside of that, I do hope you liked watching and listening to me choke on my own phlegm. The spicy cough has got me as well. But next week, everything I assume will be BAU. You'll get to hear and see the two of us. Join the Discord if you haven't already. Blokes are popping off. We've got the AFL season starting soon. NRL's obviously about to kick off round 2. NBA playoffs are not too long away. And all this other shit's really starting to pop off. So appreciate y'all watching. Join the Discord. Support the fam. Holla at your boy. I'll catch you later.